Hi.
Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. Thank you so much for clicking this video. This is my husband Joe, for those of you who are new.
Hi.
We have a lot on our hearts that we want to share with you. Kind of our first 8 months or so of being married, and God has worked in our lives a lot through the entire process and even before we were married, starting at the beginning of this year. And a lot of things have happened, and it's been a very interesting roller coaster ride the entire time. It has definitely deepened our faith in God and of what He's doing in our lives, and it's shown us how much we need to rely on Him and what ways He definitely works in the details. I know I've said that before, but He truly does. Anyway, there's a lot to get into, so this is going to be a long video, so just buckle up, get a cozy drink or something, and let's just get started.
Okay, so a little bit about myself. I am a graduate of the Naval Academy. I'm in the Navy. I'm a surface warfare officer, unqualified since I just graduated. God has molded me in a lot of ways and shown me ways that He wants me to go through prayer and through signs and telling me things to do. One of which was with regards to what ship I should have picked for my ship selection. I said a prayer. I asked God, show me what ship or what type of ship you want me to go on by the assignment for my first class cruise. So at the Naval Academy, you have to go on a fleet ship to get a fleet experience before you graduate, and that's called a cruise. I got assigned to what's called an LSD, which stands for Landing Ship Docking, and it's an amphibious landing ship, meaning that it is the mothership of a bunch of amphibious boats. So ship-to-shore type of transport. I had always had this sort of romantic dream of being on a destroyer, you know, warheads on foreheads and all that nonsense. And I was like, an LSD? No. An amphib? Certainly not. I was disappointed in the assignment for the cruise, and I ended up having a tremendously rewarding experience on the cruise, as I did with the cruise I did with my third class year, which is the sophomore year, which was also on an LSD, incidentally. Even then, God was kind of signaling, hey, maybe take a look at the amphib life. And I had a tremendously good time on that ship as well. Even still, I was like, no, I want a destroyer, even though I have not spent a minute underway on a destroyer. I have no idea what it's like. But I have spent a smaller amount of time on amphibs. So I've seen a lot of different sort of amphib operations that I have not seen their equivalents on destroyers. So when it came time for ship selection, I was like, I want a destroyer, because even though God told me, hey, pick an amphib, I was like, no, I'm good, I know better, which was a tremendous mistake. Ship selection is a grand night at the Naval Academy where there's this board, and you all line up by class rank, and you go up to the board and pluck your ship hull name off of the board, and it's with different home ports, and it's the only time in the Navy you can actually walk up and pick something. So it's the one time you get an actual choice in your future. And I chose a destroyer, even though God had told me, pick an amphib. And I picked it out of Yokosuka, of all places. The reason I picked this was because at this point in my life, I prioritized career and work over everything, even over my own faith, to be honest, at this point. And this came through with my grades, came through with my ship selection. And in preparation for this ship selection, I looked at the operational tempos of all these sorts of ships, and destroyers were the highest operational tempos with the largest amount of tasking and the most time underway. And I was like, perfect. I'm going to get qualified faster than all of my classmates. I'm going to be better at my job than all of my classmates. Perfect. That's exactly what I want. And at this time, Jess and I had already been dating for a little bit, and I had the unfortunate consideration that if I went to Japan and had this sort of operational tempo, I was like, I don't think our dating is going to be able to survive that. I mean, that's rough with the time difference of about 14 hours, plus I'm underway all the time, only communicating through email.
And we had only been dating for 2 months at that time, so
Yeah.
that was extra stress.
Yeah, right. So that sort of stress in our relationship, I was not prepared to take, and I had a conversation with one of my mentors at the academy, and he said something very salient to me, and he said, "Joe, if you're serious about this girl, start acting serious." And I was taken aback, and I thought about it for a while, and I was like, you know what? I am serious about her. I know she's the one. I've known for a while. So I'm not concerned about rushing into it because we've known each other since first grade, first of all. So
We knew each other.
I'm not concerned about that, and I'm not concerned about external perceptions. But long story short, I was like, okay, interesting. So that night, I called Jess on the phone, and I said, hey, basically the gist of the talk was, I'm going to pick the hardest assignment in the Navy. Do you want to come?
And I said yes, of course.
Yeah, or the hardest assignment in the surface Navy, rather. And she said yes, which effectively was a sort of quasi-proposal. She said yes, but at this point, it was basically like, I'm choosing my career. Do you want to come along for my career? That was basically the ultimatum. And this, of course, was in defiance of what God had told me to pick for my ship. And I continued to live this sort of lie of, I'm going to go to Yokosuka. I'm going to be on a destroyer. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to be so much more qualified and better at my job than the people who went to domestic ports. And I had this sort of power fantasy with that, and this pride with that. And, those were my orders. I picked a destroyer out of Yokosuka, and, they can't take that back. It's not like they can just take that placard out of your hand and be like, nope, you can't go. It's the one time in the Navy you get to actually pick your next assignment. So I picked a destroyer out of Yokosuka, and life went on pretty much as normal. I was excited about my ship. I was really excited about going to Japan, and you were too, right?
Yeah, I was excited. I was scared because I'd never left the country before or done really any traveling. So I was scared, but I was excited.
Right, and I was excited too. And our desires, which were not rooted in God's desires, were to go to Japan and to have this crazy sort of adventure. So the next thing that happened, so ship selection was in January, and then spring break was in March, early March. And for those of you in the know, the Naval Academy sent people home for spring break, and then the nation shut down. And everyone was pretty much preserved where they are, so nobody came back from spring break. So came home, and in March, knew that I wanted to propose to Jess. I asked her father, he said yes, and I proposed to her on March 8th. And shortly after, we got told, don't come back to the academy. And I mean, this was the first time that I was forcibly removed from the sort of career and work-focused environment that I was formerly in. Because at the academy, you were so sucked into your daily routine that there was no time for relationships or family or anything else. Or, I mean, you could make time, but I just didn't because I didn't prioritize it. Through that time in spring break, we grew very much closer, started planning our wedding. Obviously, all of our plans changed. Around mid-May, the academy sent out a series of emails saying that we were going to come back to the academy and retrieve all of our stuff that we had left there when we left for spring break because we didn't bring all of our stuff home. So we drove out there, and at this point, in mid-May, I still had not gotten my orders to Japan. I still had not gotten orders to my destroyer, and this was an item of considerable stress because on May 30th was our planned wedding date, and in order to get Jess on my benefits and my orders and everything, I had to actually have a set of orders because I was just kind of floating around in limbo land with no orders, no knowledge of what's going to happen to me, except that I'm going to Japan eventually. We go to Annapolis, move out, spend a couple of days there, have a good time, and then we are on our way back, and I get a much anticipated email with my orders. And this was a big shock because however these orders were written, it was written for maximum shock value. It had me going to the basic division officer course in San Diego, then 3 months in Japan, and then 5 weeks back in the US in Virginia, then 3 months in Japan, then 5 weeks in Rhode Island, then back to Japan for my final move. And this was a big blow to us because we were getting married in about 16 days. And we were like, wow, we are going to be spending the first year of our marriage apart. Just seeing each other for a collective, 15 weeks out of the year.
Yeah, because I wouldn't have been going to Japan with him each time. I would have been staying in the States.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the time, we were just dumbfounded with this horrible realization, like, wow, we're not going to see each other for most of the year. And what little communication we'll have will be with email. We knew we wanted to get married, but we pushed it up because we were like, okay, if we're going to be in Japan, at least we can be together in Japan. And this was my first taste of what the operational tempo in Japan would be like. I didn't realize it at the time. Later, because Jess is a very wise wife, she pointed out that this sort of 3 months out, a couple weeks in, 3 months out, that's exactly what the operational tempo is of a destroyer in Japan. And at the time, I didn't quite realize it, but it was my first gut check, like, do you really want this? Do you really want to go to Japan and put your relationship through that? And at the time, I was still just kind of wrestling with this priority between family and work. I think that's a struggle that a lot of men go through, and a lot of them make the wrong choice. And the wrong choice is unequivocally work, because the old adage goes, no one on their deathbed wishes they spent more time at the office. But I was still wrestling with this. I was like, oh my gosh, I still want to go to Japan. I still want to be better than everyone else. I still want to have that experience. But I'm also going to get married soon, and, all of the considerations with that. So we got married on May 30th, and shortly after we spent a short holiday, honeymoon in Illinois, and then headed out to San Diego. And in San Diego is where we started the long and labyrinthine process of the, wait for it, overseas screening. This phrase is a dirty word in our household.
It is.
It's really dirty, and you kind of have to douse yourself in holy water after you say it. But I'm going to be saying it a lot, so we're taking a bath afterwards, so it's okay. In order to get Jess to Japan with me, she had to go through the overseas screening process for dependents. Mm-hmm. And the complete lack of instruction, lack of direction, and lack of clarity on the guidance or lack thereof, for getting dependents, first of all, added to your benefits, added to your orders, and then on your fully approved to go over to overseas, it's just a tremendous roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And at this point, after bashing our heads against this task, it's like we have an appointment with this guy, but in order to get an appointment with this guy, you have to see this other guy. But his office is on the other side of the base, and his office hours are from 12 a.m. to 12:01 a.m. And it's only on the second Tuesday of every month, but only on days of a full moon. This really isn't an exaggeration.
It really isn't. It was bad. It was
and you had to
really
get
bad.
these selected structures of forms, and then if you got the old form that was still technically current, you had to redo it and then get a different form. This is no exaggeration. And if you have any sort of contact with the government and bureaucracy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But take that, dial it up another 12 notches, mm-hmm. at least.
On top of every time we would try to do something with my overseas screening, right at the beginning, it was like, oh, you're not on his benefits yet. And it's like, I am. I'm in the system. Why am I not in your system? Like, mm-hmm. It was bad. I was never in anything that I needed to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ever.
Right.
It was really weird.
Yeah.
It took us weeks to just get me on your benefits.
Right. And at this point, it was like almost as if God was telling us no. As in, at first we thought like, sort of like saying you weren't going to Japan.
Yeah, that's what I thought, was that I wasn't supposed to go.
Right.
And I was supposed to just stay in the U.S. while he went to Japan, which didn't seem right since we were told to get married. Like,
Right.
you know, we had peace about that.
Yeah, God led us to get married, and there's no reason why he would then just say, okay, well, you're going to Japan, but you're not. So anyway, going on, all these roadblocks were like a sort of Jonah situation when he tried to flee his commitment to go to Nineveh. Roadblock after roadblock if he's heading in the wrong direction. And like Jess said, we initially thought it was just sort of directed at Jess, but really this was sort of a wake-up call for me, like, do you really want this? Do you really want to go to Japan? Is this really what you ought to do? And finally, after a good 12, 13 weeks?
I think it was 14.
14. Yeah, 14 weeks about, we finally finished the overseas screening for her.
Yeah, after getting the wrong packets multiple times.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, just to be told, like, oh no, this is the simple packet you have to fill out. Why did you fill out this other one? And getting the wrong appointments, but then trying to get the correct doctor's appointment, but then they wouldn't do the correct thing at that doctor's appointment, so I'd have to redo it. It was a mess the entire time.
Yeah, and God knew I would not stop until I had that paper. And even in all of that, we still have not gotten her passport yet. Of course, as you recall, I was saying in my initial set of orders that we weren't going to have that much time together, but through a tremendous amount of prayer, we were able to get the first part of my orders changed. That first 3-month period in Japan, we were able to cut out by moving one of my other schools, first of all, to San Diego and right next to the Basic Division Officer course. Again, an example of how God answered our prayers and was able to keep us together. So God saved me from going to Japan then, and that was the first time. And once we had completed the overseas screening, we still had this sort of impending doom about going to Japan. And as the dates approached, like the end of Basic Division Officer course, we were like, oh no, we're not going to see each other for 3 months. But then God saved us and gave me another school in San Diego. But as that progressed, the impending doom leapt right back, and it was, oh my gosh, we're going to have to go to Japan. But me still being centered on work, but still that priority was slowly declining, and God was working in me and changing my desires. But I was still like, well, this is what my orders say, so we kind of just have to make this work. I wouldn't have chosen it then, but I was like, well, we chose it, so we got to make it work. In the midst of that second class in San Diego, I heard about a practice known as bubble shipping. And this was a tremendously heart-wrenching thing to hear about, having picked Japan with a spouse in tow. So due to the restrictions in the area, all personnel were restricted to the ship, couldn't leave. Even if you were in port, you couldn't step off onto the pier and go home. If you were in port, you had to stay on the ship to prevent any sort of transmission of disease, and you were bubbled onto your ship. It was a bubble ship, and the ship that I had selected was one of those ships. And by the time that news got to me, they were starting to lift that sort of restriction and operational procedure. But that was another gut check, that if you go to Yokosuka, the very last thing that you can do is be a good spouse or member of your family. I mean, there are those who choose it and make it work, but after reevaluating and considering my priorities and how much they had changed in those several months of marriage, I realized, oh my gosh, I can't be the spouse that I want to be for Jess if if I am in that sort of environment and under those sort of demands. Again, bubble shipping is being dialed back, but it's still very much a possibility if cases spike. Very much indicative of how personnel are treated. It's always because of where it is in the world and the operational demands on it, you are at the mercy, of course, as you are with the rest of the military, but especially in Nicosia, you are at the mercy of whatever the ship needs to do in terms of tasking, and there are a lot of tasks. So at this point, my priorities were rapidly shifting towards family and relationships, and focusing on Jess, and Lord willing, when we can have kids someday. The bubble ship concept really just shook me, like, do you really want to go to Japan with the desires you have now? And it's like, I was looking back at Ship Selection Joe, and I was like, what were you thinking? I mean, of course, no one could have predicted what was happening over the next several months throughout this year, but even still, even under normal conditions, it's very tough on families. At the conclusion of my second school, I started getting a mysterious lower abdominal pain. Rewinding a little bit, I had some abdominal pain, just sort of glassy lower stomach pain in mid-December of 2019. And I just kind of dismissed it as just like a weird stomach thing, but it was just recurring. And no rhyme or reason to it. It wasn't like it was activated by dairy or gluten or whatever. And I always just kind of assumed it was just like gonna go away, but it never really did. And then I got some acute abdominal pain and swelling in the middle of my second school in San Diego. Long story short, we have to go to the ER, gets diagnosed as a hernia, I have to have surgery, and then we get to have another 2 weeks in San Diego. But prior to that, we still had that another section in Japan, another period of time in Japan after that second school. And we were praying so desperately not to go, of course. And that one of my schools could be pulled back, so we have more time in the US before we ultimately have to go to Japan, because we're still under every expectation that we would go to Japan. This was one of the first times that Jess's intuition really surprised me. But anyway, I got assigned to a school in Hawaii in that 40-day period in between my second school in San Diego and my last school in Rhode Island. And Jess made the comment that, you want to explain that?
Yeah, so he told me, like, we're going to go to Hawaii for this school, and I was like, okay. I don't see that. For those of you, I've mentioned this before, I'm a pretty intuitive person, and I just get feelings off of things, and I was like, I really don't feel that. Like, I don't think we're going. And I told you as much, and you were like, no, like, it's on my orders. Like, I'm going. Like, see, like, you can read it. I'm going. And I was just like, I don't think we are, but okay. Like, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and of course at this point we still hadn't gotten her passport, so we would have had to pay out of pocket for her to fly to Hawaii anyway. Mm-hmm. But then I had to go to the ER, had to have my surgery, and the school in Hawaii got canceled. We ended up staying in San Diego for another period of time. And, Jess was right with her intuition. And this was our first sort of suspicion, maybe we aren't going to Japan. Because a condition like a hernia, I suppose, likely would impact my overseas screening. That dirty phrase again. Now mine was in question. My golden ticket was being shredded. I had the sort of realization, if this is a hernia, I imagine I can't go. But I was like, no, I probably still will go. You can repair it, whatever, easy. And sure enough, the surgery went well, recovered well. But sure enough, my command told me, yes, you do need to redo your overseas screening. And this was our realization that there's a chance that we're not going. Because if that screening were to be denied, neither of us would be going to Japan. And during this recovery time, in San Diego after my surgery, we decided that we were going to commit our lives to God. Of course, we were Christian beforehand, but we really hadn't made any sort of life habits with it. We read devotionals occasionally. We went to church occasionally.
Very lukewarm.
Yeah,
Christians.
very lukewarm. And, of course, we knew all the doctrinal questions, but we hadn't really fully committed to the idea of living according to God's purpose for our marriage. So we committed to that, and we read devotionals every day. We read a chapter of the Bible every day. We go to church as best we can, given the conditions that we're in. We witnessed a tremendous working and shifting in our lives. For me, I got to the point where Japan seemed completely anathema to me, to the point where the decision to go to Japan was just utterly out of the question for me.
For myself, through all of this, when Joe told me in January that it was Japan, and I was excited, also scared, because it's a huge change for someone who hasn't been out of the country. I was still going to school at that time for my bachelor's degree in accounting, and I was like, I want to be a forensic accountant, I want to be an auditor, like something cool like that. I want to go for my CPA. Like, when I started going for this degree, I wasn't intending on even getting married. Like, we weren't dating at the time, and so I was like, I'm not getting married, I'm just going to make work my thing. Very similar to what Joe was doing. We got married in May, and around that time, like really a couple weeks afterwards, I was like, I'd really like to stay at home, take care of Joe, be a wife, be a mother. Like, I'd really like to do that. And that for me was really weird. I wasn't expecting that change, and it kind of just came about overnight almost. It was very weird for me. And I stopped caring about school. I mean, I finished my degree, but I stopped caring about, like, I have to learn everything because I'm going to use this one day, because I knew I wouldn't be using it. And I had no desire to work. I still wanted to do something for the family, but I didn't necessarily want to work, 60 hours a week auditing clients or whatever. Then when we started doing the devotions and all of that, it just really clicked and solidified for me, and just, I guess, gave my heart purpose. And it was like, this makes sense. Like, this desire, this change of my heart makes sense now. And in about, I think June, was it? I think in May or June, I started second guessing Japan. And it was kind of a burden when we were engaged, of course, thinking about, him being really busy on his ship and, doing whatever, and then I wouldn't hear from him. And of course that was stressful, but it was around May or June that I just started feeling really heavy, and I felt the burden of Japan. And to an extreme that I can't even explain, it just felt very dark and daunting, and like we shouldn't be doing it. And to an intuitive person, that makes sense, I'm sure, but it didn't seem right. It didn't feel right with my spirit.
And it's important to remember the verse. I'll read it to you. Psalm 37, 3-5. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act. The key phrase to remember here is, he will give you the desires of your heart. The more we aligned ourselves with God, the more that we aligned ourselves with our faith, the less we desired Japan, the more we desired family, the more we desired kids, the more we desired each other, frankly. Mm-hmm. The closer we were to God, the closer we were to each other. Mm-hmm. And this upward trend of closest to God, each other, and distance to Japan has only magnified with the scale of time. Okay, so after my period of recovery in San Diego, we still had some time between the end of that and my school in Rhode Island, which is where we're filming right now. In this time, I was feeling pretty good. I was recovered. I was past the 2-week mark, which is generally when most things go wrong, if they go wrong. I was past that point, and we figured we could kind of finagle some kind of trip home. So we live in Illinois, which, for those of you who are geographically inclined, that is between California and Rhode Island. And so we figured we could take a trip home, because we're both from the same town in Illinois. And we could take a trip home on our way to Rhode Island. And this was one of the few times that a door was open for us in the admin department. Um, I mean, quite literally, I walked into the admin office and asked a guy who wasn't even the decision maker, hey, do you think I could take a trip home on my way out to my next school? He's like, oh, let's go to the officer in charge. Like, he just took me right away. And this admin office, I'll spare you all the details, but they're difficult. Go ahead and find a dictionary, look up the definition of difficult. I won't say any more. Anyway, but this was the most painless process ever. They were like, oh yeah, go ahead, leave, fine. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, he came home with that news, and I was like, what happened? Because we have lots of stories where things did not go like that.
Yeah.
So it was interesting and a blessing.
Never had a smooth story of admin. Every time I'd go to admin and come home, I'd be in a horrible mood and I'd be sad.
True story.
Anyway, but this was the first positive experience I've had with the admin. And this was, considering all the closed doors we had been butting our heads against, this was kind of a shock. And we're like, wow, like God's opening the doors for us to go home. Great. And you know, we're living in the Spirit and praying in the Spirit, and God's showing His will for us and opens the door for us to go home. Because we were able to go home, we were able to plan a move through the military to get all of our stuff from Illinois to Japan. And because my order still said Japan, I was like, well, we're still going. I mean, we've kind of lost desire for it, but you know, we're still going. That's fine. Like, we're gonna make it work. We can do this. You know, we're strong. We're in the faith. Like, we can do this. But after that move was orchestrated, we lost every last little bit of desire for Japan. It was bizarre how much we did not desire Japan. Not that we did not desire work or service or whatever, but it was, you know, Japan was this looming, distant disaster for us on the horizon. And I was kind of the last holdout on Japan. I was like, no, like, we're gonna make it work. It'll be awesome. We'll see Tokyo, Kyoto, whatever. We'll make it work. You know, it's gonna be hard, but we can do this. Like, this, we can hack this challenge. But after the move, I was like, wow, I wish I had picked something else. I would give anything to go back and pick something else. Through the course of being home, we were able to go to Jess's old church.
Yeah, so it had been a bit, obviously, since getting married, that I had been to my church again, and so had a few people come up to us, and the pastor specifically, and they were like, oh, you're married! We didn't even know you were engaged or dating anyone. Like, it just, everything happened so fast, and with the shutdowns, people just didn't know anything. So it was basically a clean slate for us to tell them our story. And so there were, what, 4 people? So about 4 different couples that came up to us and asked us, like, where we were from, what we were doing, where we were going. Every single time we answered, oh yeah, we're going to Japan, we're going to Yokosuka. And like, every time one of us said it, it was like everyone sucked all of the oxygen just like out of the room, and it was like we were lying to a teacher almost. Like, it was really weird. It was like, Japan, wait, did I just say like a wrong word? Like, or, you know, like, it was weird. It was super weird. And both of us felt that, and we didn't talk about it for a bit after church, but then it was just like, you know, when we talked about it, we were like, that was weird, wasn't it? That was super weird. That felt wrong.
Yeah, we were sitting in the driveway at her house after a drive, and we talked about it. It's like, yeah, I just told the teacher my dog ate my homework. I mean, possible, but not likely. You know, possible we're going to Japan, but it didn't feel right. It felt like just wrong. We started talking, you know, I was like, you know, I still have my overseas screening to do. It's possible we're not even going to Japan. And, you know, we ran through the possibilities of that. I'll spare you the medical details, but we thought, you know, maybe this is a disqualifying condition from overseas. I mean, not from regular service, but perhaps from going to overseas because of limited medical facilities or higher operational tempo that I've mentioned before.
As we were sitting in the driveway, the sermon that we had listened to that morning was actually about thanking God and praising God for the outcome that was happening or going to happen in your life. And we both walked away from that kind of puzzled, because it just was like, thank God for the outcome. Like, what? That's okay. And I think that just hit both of us in kind of a strange way. But then Joe told me something he was talking about with his dad, and I'll let you explain that.
Yeah, so my dad, the day before, we went out to lunch, and he also told me a story about when he was praying for something to happen, and before it actually happened, God told him to thank him for the outcome, and he did, and the thing came to pass. So we got told twice in 2 days to be thinking about scenarios where we are anticipating or desiring an action from God and thanking him for the outcome before it happens, and thanking him for what happens and how he works in our lives. Back to our conversation in the driveway of her house, we were thinking, it's very possible we're not going to Japan. And we started thinking about what home ports in the U.S. there are.
Joe had asked me before, but then also this day, like, so what home ports do you see? Because by this point, we'd been through a couple different times where my intuition was right about things. And so Joe's asking me just what I thought about that, where I could see us. And I was like, well, San Diego could be, but doesn't feel right. And I was like, Florida seems like the state. Like, it sticks out to me. That's the one that just feels right. And
it's the oddest thing, when I pictured myself on a ship, it was never really on a destroyer. I would always kind of have this image of what is known as a big deck amphib in the Navy, and specifically something known as an LHD. Now, earlier in the video I mentioned an LSD. An LHD is also an amphib platform for the Navy, and it stands for Landing Helicopter Dock. So it has the ability to send amphibious ships ashore and also launch and recover aircraft as well. I looked it up on my phone and I showed it to Jess. And you want to explain what your reaction to it was?
He showed me the picture, and okay, mind you, I don't know anything about like the Navy or boats or ships or anything related to any of this. And he showed me the picture, and I was like, that's weird, because that is exactly what I was picturing you on. And I was like, I didn't know what any of these were. I haven't looked up a ship before, and it was really weird, because that's exactly what I had been seeing.
Right. And the odds of this are astronomically small, being a coincidence, because of the entire 293 ship Navy, there are 7 LHDs in the entire Navy, one of which, the 8th one, was destroyed in a fire that summer when we were in San Diego. So there are only 7 LHDs in the entire Navy, which represents a 2% spread of the whole Navy. So really there's a 2% chance of picking a random ship out of the lineup and it being an LHD. And Jess just happened to picture me on an LHD, which she didn't even know what an LHD was. So that was the first sort of like, whoa, hold on a second. There's something more here. So after thinking like, wow, Florida, specifically Mayport, which is near Jacksonville, after considering Mayport and then LHD, I was like, I don't even know if there is an LHD in Mayport. And I look it up, and sure enough, there's one. LHD-7 USS Iwo Jima. Never had even considered or thought about the existence of the ship before. And here it was. We had both independently sort of pictured the ship, and I showed the picture to Jess, and she was like, "Yep, that's the one." And she was like, "I feel peace about Mayport, Florida." Mm-hmm. I was like, "Okay, well, let's test this theory out here." And sure enough, there's an LHD right in Mayport, and there's only one.
Yeah, and as someone who's intuitive, again, if you're like this, you understand, but when something is right, it feels right. And if you're not going to do something, or you shouldn't do something, or something along those lines, it doesn't feel right. And you know it. And you know either way, is it good or is it bad? And with this, I just felt completely at peace. Whereas with Japan, I just felt so overwhelmed and just, I don't know, it was wrong. I felt that it was wrong. So it was weird to have this kind of peace with Florida.
Yeah, and this sort of thinking is hard for me because I'm very much facts, show me the evidence, make your case, and unless you have the evidence to show me, I'm not going to believe you. And it was a long journey for me to kind of understand that that's only one way of thinking about things. It's correct it's the right approach to use, say, in a court of law or in a scientific journal, but for things of faith, you can't really just demand to see the evidence. Granted, there's a whole discipline of apologia that you can get into with faith and the Bible. But for matters of trusting God, you can't just be like, okay, God, show me your cards. And it's been a journey for me, has been being able to trust God and to learn to appreciate intuition for what it is, because it goes beyond just simple, here is what I've observed, therefore this. So after a period at home, and after our quarantine concluded, and we're in Rhode Island now for my last school. And as I mentioned, today, the date of filming is December 22nd. Bit of a spoiler, my orders had to be leaving for Japan on December 18th. And arriving in December 20th. So a little bit of spoiler, and that didn't happen, but I'll get to that. I knew I had to redo my, wait for it, overseas screening. And given our experience in San Diego, I was expecting an extremely lengthy, labyrinthine, Byzantine process. And I was not ready for this and not looking forward to it. But I knew I had to redo it, and I was like, well, I'm only in Rhode Island for a short amount of time. There's no way that it can get done on time, but I'll do my best. But at this point, we're still like, Mayport would be awesome, but my orders still say Japan, so that's where I'm going. We had our orders to Japan, and we were in Rhode Island, and we knew what we had to do. We had to do my overseas screening, and Mayport would be nice, but sorry, we still were just believing and walking by sight.
And something, as Joe said, that we were here for a very short amount of time, and as he'll say here in a second, we're still here. We're here longer than we were supposed to be. And when we first came to Rhode Island, even down to us bringing our car with, because the original plan was for my mom to come out and get the car when we left Rhode Island, and for her to take it back home, and my parents were going to keep it while we were in Japan. And I was talking to my mom, who again is also intuitive, and she's like, I think you're going to be staying in Rhode Island longer than you think you are. And I was like, I do too. Like, that's weird.
At this point, we were still going to Japan, still having that dread, and we had no desire to go. And my career priorities had totally shifted, and family was now brought to the forefront of my mind. But I thought, maybe this process will save us from going. And around the 6-week mark post my surgery, I started to have more abdominal pain and more, just irritation of the area, and on the other side too now. So shortly after we got to Rhode Island, I was still, I had a feeling, maybe this Florida thing is going to happen, but then I was also like, well, my orders say Japan, so that's where I'm going. But I was like, well, if God wants us to go to Florida, then we're going to go to Florida. If he wants us to go to Japan, then we're going to end up in Japan. So I asked God to show me signs of where we would be going. I asked God to confirm to me in daily conversation the direction that our life was going to go and where we're going to end up. And the first day of class, I walk in, and have our general introductions. And the head of the engineering department at the school I was going to walked in, and I think you can guess where this is going. He said, oh yeah, I used to be the chief engineer on, guess what? USS Iwo Jima LHD-7 out of Mayport, Florida. And I was like, nah, it's just coincidence. Like there's lots of ships in the Navy. Like, okay, so one time. But it was a daily occurrence over the next several weeks of whenever the instructor was looking for an example of a ship, he was like, oh yeah, when you're filling out these tags, let's just say you're on LHD-7, or it's like, if you're going into yards period, say if you're in Mayport, it was just constant Mayport, LHD-7, Iwo Jima. And it was down to the point where even in some of the shows we were watching, Jacksonville, which is the major city next to Mayport, was mentioned. And Florida was just constantly reinforced in our minds.
Yeah, and even down, I forgot to mention this earlier, right before we left home to come here, I was going to my chiropractor, and she was talking. She was like, yeah, I've had a lot of my clients leave and go to other states, and you're one of them now too. And I was like, I'm sorry. And she's like, yeah, I have a client in Florida, where like they always ask me to come visit. And I was like, even then, even before you asked for those daily signs, we were told Florida again.
Yeah. And in the basic division officer course, all the way back in San Diego, the final simulator assessment, because you do ship driving simulators in the class, the final assessment is to pull in and dock your ship. And of course, I was doing a destroyer, as was as what my order said. But the final assessment was pulling into Mayport, Florida, and docking next to LHD-7. And I only realized this a couple days ago, actually, that even then it was being signaled, maybe reconsider. And during my second class, which was another ship handling class, we were supposed to do a number of Yokosuka practice transits, but for one reason or another, we never made it to Yokosuka. Either we overshot the turn, or when we turned into Yokosuka Harbor, we missed the dock or went somewhere else. So I've never actually in a simulator made it to Yokosuka. It was always just some sort of thing would go wrong, and we'd miss the dock, or go somewhere else, or miss the turn, whatever. But the simulated Mayport transit, just very smooth, pulled right in, docked, easy.
Of course.
So yeah, right. So in a lot of ways, it is sort of an allegory for what we've been through so far. Is like Yokosuka has suffered roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, and then Mayport was just slip right in, easy. That's where God wants you. During the class, again, Mayport was mentioned almost constantly. And for those of you who don't know much about the Navy, Mayport isn't that large of a port when compared to fleet concentration areas like Norfolk or San Diego. Norfolk and San Diego have lots of piers, aircraft carriers, thousands and thousands of sailors at these big bases. And, Mayport isn't a total backwater, but it's smaller. And there's really only one major flagship, LHD-7. But for whatever reason, everybody was just going off the rails talking about Mayport. This was, again, in direct answer to the prayer, God, please show me in daily conversation. But of course, I still my orders still say, Japan, and this overseas screening process seems to be going suspiciously smoothly. So I'm like, I guess we're still going to Japan. But when I went in for the first meeting with the overseas screening office at the health clinic here, even then I overheard a conversation about someone's overseas screening being denied. And then when I was talking to my instructors about starting this overseas screening process, one of them was like, no, you just complete the overseas screening process in Japan, which, think about that for 1 second, but doesn't work. You can't be overseas if you haven't been screened. But anyway, one of the other instructors stepped in and was like, no, do your overseas screening. If he fails his overseas screening, his ship won't accept him in Japan. And I was like, whoa, I hadn't really realized that, like, what would have happened to me if the overseas screening was failed. And I was like, that's the first time I've heard anyone in authority saying, if this, then this, with regards to Japan. Like, the possibility was there of not going. But anyway, after coming home from that first overseas screening appointment where I knocked out the audiogram and the first initial questionnaire with the paperwork and all that, I came home and everything was going really smoothly for this overseas screening. And we're looking at this through the lens of Jess's overseas screening, which was just roadblock, roadblock, roadblock. And this was like, oh, here is a very well-lit pathway, and guess what? You don't even have to have your eyes open. We'll have someone to walk you through the process, basically. That's how relatively smooth this was compared to the San Diego one. And we're like, does this mean we're going to Japan if this is going so smoothly? But bear in mind, Jess still doesn't have her passport. So if I'm going to Japan, Jess doesn't come with me for
heaven knows how long.
How long it takes for them to find the passport out of whatever dumpster they stored it in. I mean, that's the only thing I can assume that happened to it, along with her birth certificate.
Yeah.
So I come home, and I mean, how did you take that news?
Not well. You know, he came home with that, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like, you're going to be going to Japan, and I'm going to be at home for however long, and I didn't take it well. It really just hurt my heart. I mean, I don't think any young newlywed couple wants to be separated, and especially during these times when you don't even know, like in my case, if I'm getting my passport or when, and it's just, it was a lot to take in, and I kind of, I guess, had the mental breakdown that had been building up for quite some time, and everything just hit me. I was like, wow, he is going to Japan, and I don't have any peace about Japan whatsoever. Him being there, myself being there, both of us being there together, like, it didn't matter. I had no peace about it. And so just all of those emotions hit me at once, and I just, it really wasn't a good situation, and it was very, I guess, it opened both of our eyes to how much we didn't want that.
Again, driving home, this decision that I made in January, and now we're in timeline in late November, early December, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, I made this decision basically a year ago when I was a completely different person, and I had these completely different priorities. I mean, I was like, gosh, I wish I could travel back in time and smack Joe in the head and be like, no, stop, trust me on this one. And it's funny, when I was walking out the door to my overseas screening appointment, I was in uniform, of course, and I had my command ball cap for the ship I was going to in Yokosuka. And when I picked it up and looked at it, I was like, something about this doesn't seem right. But, you know, I still put it on. You know, I had to wear a cover. And, but yeah, I was like, something about this cover doesn't seem right. But anyway, when I got home, you know, I told the news to Jess.
Well, and when he was leaving that morning, and you know, I went and kissed him goodbye and everything, and I looked at it, and I was just like, ugh, just like something like deep in my spirit just shuddered. And it was like, again, when we were at church, and it felt like we were lying to our teachers when we said Japan, and like it was that same feeling of just, this isn't right, this doesn't feel right, and like it didn't look, not as in like he looked handsome, but like it didn't look good on him. It didn't fit. It wasn't right, and it felt very, very wrong.
Right. I come home, break the news to you. Goes very badly, and again, no decision had been made at this point. But based off of how the doors just flew open for the screening, we're like, oh no, this can't possibly be what we have to do. And, you know, we talk about it for a while and say, like, well, you know, we trust God. If God wants us in Japan, we're going to go to Japan. If God wants us in Florida, he'll send us to Florida. And then, you know, we kind of go about our day, but then as the day goes on, it weighs heavier and heavier and heavier on me. Mm-hmm. Jess is doing okay at this point, but it starts to dial up for me now. And I start to fully confront what it truly meant to go to Japan and what it might do to our relationship. And after engaging in significant denialism over the fact, I realized, I can't be the prospective father I want to be in Japan. I can't be the husband that I want to be in Japan. I will be forced to be a workaholic in Japan. Not that I'm averse to hard work, but I mean, underway for most of the year, being home for a couple weeks here and there, where Jess would never really see me. It's by force making work the ultimate priority, and it was a decision that I made when I didn't even have a concept of what really marriage would be like. I finally just kind of, we were laying on this couch right here, my head resting on her lap, and I was just like, I totally and wholly regret the decision to choose Japan. I finally admitted to myself and out loud and to Jess that I made a bad decision. My priorities were off. I am scared of what this will do to our relationship, what this will do to our prospective family, and it may even prevent having a family because of the operational tempo and the stress it would put on both of us and all of that sort of things. And God had really been working in our hearts to desire having children and a family, and Lord willing, He will bless us with that. But we knew that if we went to Japan, that possibility was pretty much out the window because of stress levels and everything else. I finally admitted, this is wrong. I hate this. I mean, I pray to God that He has mercy on us and takes away this cup of suffering and wrath. Because bear in mind, He already had told me not to go to Japan. He already had told me not to pick Yokosuka. He told me to pick an amphib. But I, in my prideful defiance, was, nah, I know best. And I had finally realized the long journey and hardship that had put Jess and I through. And the heartache and the dread of Japan and the prospect of going to Japan. And I realized, why didn't I just trust and listen to God? Because at the time, I was like, oh, amphibs, well, you're not doing as much. It's not the tip of the spear or whatever weird fantasy I had for my career in the Navy. I was like, oh, I want to be destroyers. Amphibs are lame, whatever teenage dribble that I was spouting at the age of 21. And I finally admitted this was wrong. I made a horrible mistake. I defied God. Have mercy on me, Lord. So in this conversation, Jess asked me, well, has God told you anything? Because we know in His Word, in James, it shows that God gives wisdom without finding fault. All you have to do is ask without doubt. And that's one of my favorite sections in the Bible. But and I like to utilize that as much as I can because God's wisdom is so much higher than our earthly wisdom. Jess asked me, well, what has God revealed to you? And earlier, the night before I had gone into my overseas screening appointment, I had this prompting, Joe, everything's going to be okay. I've taken care of it. And I told Jess about it the night before, didn't I?
Yeah, because he was, not stressing, but he was kind of stressing about the appointment and everything that was going on.
Yeah. But even still, the next day, it still hit us just the same,
I just thought about that.
What? What?
I didn't think about that until now.
What?
That, the next day, we were going to get kind of awful news in a way, but the night before, God told you it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
I just thought about
Yeah.
I'm going to not cry. I'm fine.
We'll edit it
But I
out.
just thought about that.
Yeah.
We didn't know we were going to get that bad news.
Yeah.
But you're still told that it was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I hadn't made that connection either. God is good.
It's just constant, guys.
Mhm. Yeah. And we had to keep this verse in mind, I'll read you another verse, Psalm 84:11. For the Lord is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. And another verse from Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And we had to keep that at the forefront of our minds, that God does not withhold good from his children. And if Japan was not going to be good for us, we wouldn't go. And if Florida wasn't good for us, we're not going to go. If wherever we serve his kingdom the best was where we're going to end up. But anyway, Jess had asked me if God had told me anything about where we were going. And you, as the viewer, know very well I had been told pretty strongly at this point. But I was like, oh, no, I'm equivocating. No chance that's actually real. It's just coincidence, you know. I said, well, I prayed that in everyday conversation that, you know, it would be revealed to me where we were going to go. That if Florida was truly where we were going to go, that it would be mentioned, you know, just in daily conversation. I'd listen to it and take notice of it. And then I began to tell Jess all about the numerous instances of Mayport and USS Iwo Jima being mentioned.
He told me that, and I was just like, I didn't even know you asked for that. I was like, I think you got your answer. I think God's been very clear with you. It's been very apparent. Yeah,
very, very clear. And of course, me struggling to expand my mind beyond simply what I can touch and see, even though this was occurring in the natural world. So like, well, this is just coincidences in normal conversation. But as soon as Jess said that, you know, like, I think you've been told. I took a moment and just kind of thought about it. I was like, I think you're right. I think God has told us exactly where we're going. And I said, I think we need to start thanking God for the victory. And as soon as I said that, we both felt a tremendous peace and calm
that we've never had through this entire, the overseas screening, all of that. We hadn't experienced this.
Right. So I'd resisted saying, thank God for the victory. Like, start thanking God for the outcome, just like we had talked about that Sunday those months back, about thanking God for the outcome and the victory, which we really should have done then, which is the very night that it was sort of revealed to us where we were going. We should have thanked God for the outcome, but this time we were thanking him for the victory. And we received what in Philippians 4:7 calls the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. And if you've had a faith experience like this, you know exactly what we're talking about. Similarly, if you walk into somewhere where there's a lot of spiritual baggage and sin and sort of demonic activity, you get the inverse of this, where you feel heavy in your soul and you feel that
you just want to flee.
You want to get out of there. This is not for you. Consider the opposite of that, where you feel at home, your spirit is being just embraced by the Spirit.
It's very warm and loving.
Yeah, and we just looked at each other and like, we're not going to Japan. This boogeyman in our lives that was held in front of us as this menacing, impending disaster was finally taken away. And of course, at this point, we haven't received any sort of orders that we're going to Florida or anything. But on that Friday, it was so abundantly clear that, you know, it was revealed to us. We're not going to Japan. We're going to Florida. We're going to USS Iwo Jima. We thanked God for the victory, and we had just a very special time that weekend, thanking God for the victory and thanking him for his plan for our lives. And that was several weeks ago. Since my time in Rhode Island, I've had several medical appointments, including an ultrasound and an MRI, looking for recurrence of the hernia or whatever. And there's been no detectable problems, but yet the pain persists. Doctors seem to think it's some kind of nerve pain. And right now, December 22nd, 2020. We don't know if that condition would prevent me from being overseas deployable, but we do know what God has revealed to us, that we are going to Florida and we are going to USS Iwo Jima. And as we're recording this, we've had multiple instances of doubting this. And it's been really hard to walk by faith, not by sight, over this, because every once in a while it's like, oh my gosh, like what if we were misinterpreting the signs? What if we had been just engaged in an advanced denialism and this was just our coping mechanism or some contorted distortion of what God had done for us? And I mean, even today, I was having my doubts. I was like, am I second guessing myself? I mean, they also talked about Japan, but the only times they mentioned Japan, in the few instances they did, was about how much it sucked right now. We estimate, I mean, it was Jacksonville and Mayport and Florida, all of that was being mentioned even in our shows. And we estimate it's probably over 40 times as a very conservative estimate that Mayport, Florida, Jacksonville, whatever, USS Iwo Jima had been mentioned in just daily conversation. And I mean, for the folks playing at home, how often do you hear about Jacksonville, Mayport, or USS Iwo Jima? I mean, granted, you may not be in the Navy, but I mean, this is a unique thing to be sort of surrounded in this sort of descriptors and jargon. And bear in mind, we're in Rhode Island. It's not like we're living in Georgia or Florida, for that matter, where you would hear about these things. We're in Rhode Island and very much removed from that sort of environment. But we still have our periods of doubt.
Yeah, it has been definitely a growing experience, and as Joe said earlier, definitely walking by faith and not by sight. And as someone who's intuitive, it's a little bit easier, but it's still hard at the end of the day, because his orders say we're going to Japan. Well, he's going to Japan because I can't, but they say right now that we're going to Japan. And we both know, we've been told in so many, literally dozens of ways, that we are going to Florida. And it is really terrifying. And the devil definitely uses that as a way to shake our faith. And we know, it's part of the reason we're doing this video, we know that this is a great opportunity to share what God has been doing in our lives with you guys, with friends, with family. And that's what we've been doing. And we're going to be honest, when we do it, there's a part of us that's like, please don't think we're crazy. Like, this happened and we know what we felt, and we both felt the same thing at the same time. And just that amount of peace that we've only had 2 other times in our life, which are the same times, but when we got engaged, the day we got engaged, and then the day that we got married. Those were the 2 other times we felt that kind of peace. And just, it's incredible. It's really incredible. And so yeah, we've had our days, our moments of doubting, and not doubting of God's goodness, but how he's going to work everything out, because right now we're down to the wire, and we have literally one more appointment, and that's Joe's overseas screening appointment. He's had all of his other doctor's appointments and random surgery checkups and all of that. We have basically one more chance to get to Florida and to not get to go to Japan. And you know, something that we just have to keep reminding ourselves is in our humanness, we might be able to screw something up and we would need a backup, but God doesn't. God only needs one time to say, no, you're not going to Japan, which he's told us already. You're going to Florida instead. And it's really coming down to us just truly having it on faith, and only faith, because we don't have anything else to look at. And it's definitely been a growing experience, and it's been scary, but that's part of the reason we're making this video, is hopefully this will help you guys. And we really look forward to in the future looking back at this one day and we want to make some sort of shadow box with Joe's old ball cap and my overseas screening stuff and his old orders and like all of that, so we can look at it and just remember how much we need to trust God and how much God seriously works in the details. I've said that frequently for a while, even on my channel, and God works through the details, and he always does. And this is just one, I guess, simple way that we are seeing this in our lives almost on the daily.
Right.
And everything is coming together. And right now, yeah, we have one more appointment. We're scared, but we know, we have faith. We do not doubt that God is going to do this for us, because he is. He's told us. He has changed our heart's desire for this. And God doesn't let us down, and he loves us. And yeah.
Yeah, so we hope our story can be a builder of faith for those of you who watch this, and a reminder to trust God.
Hey guys, Editing Jess here. So Joe and I filmed the first part of this video that you just saw here about 3 months ago, and we are currently in a much different place. So I just wanted to break up this video because we didn't realize how long that conversation, the first part, was, and then there are 2 other parts that go along with the first part. So we didn't realize how long the video was going to be, so we didn't want to make you guys watch a 2-hour video on different parts of this process. So this is actually part 1 of the series that we are going to do, and we will have 3 parts. I will make sure to have an album on my YouTube channel that you can go and watch all 3 parts, but we just don't want you guys to miss anything, but also we don't want it to be such a lengthy video that it just takes forever for you guys to watch it. We hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and again, sorry for the length of it, but there was just a lot of information to tell you guys. So anyway, thank you again so much for watching, and I guess this is me closing out this video. Anyway guys, stay cozy my cuties. Bye guys.